Hello, my name is Peter Inke. I'm Chair of EXARC and Director of Historical Research and Digital History at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. The very concept of an open-air museum implies the safeguarding and preservation of cultural resources in a sustainable way for the future. This sustainability is usually applied across a wide set of fields, including both tangible and intangible resources, from documentation of empirical evidence through archaeological and reconstructive practices to conservation of material culture and biodiversity. This paper sets out to show how effective EXARC's quadripartite approach has been to supporting open-air museums that are working towards sustainability goals. EXARC's commitment to this conference is in 3 parts. The papers you hear now, along with 2 subsequent open access sessions, which are broadcast virtually by EXARC. Through 15 papers, we will see how EXARC members are applying sustainable actions to open-air museums every day. It can first be challenging to see how the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as SDGs, can be applied to open-air museums, especially when you see that each one of the 17 goals has further, more detailed targets. For example, Goal 1, ending poverty in all forms everywhere, seems a huge demand. How does a small open-air museum approach ending poverty? Let alone some of Goal 1's 7 extra objectives. The first step is not to feel overwhelmed. Not all of the goals have to be met or achieved at the same time. What is important is to be willing to adjust and make conscious efforts to want to achieve change and to think differently. This change may require museums to think tangentially. As EXARC members show, there are many ways that open-air museums can meet sustainability goals. These goals do not have to be approached head-on. They can be approached from many different directions and managed through several small changes. It can safely be said that EXARC and all of the papers that we will review today meet SDG Goal 11, Target 11.4, aiming to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. To do this, EXARC's mission to support open-air museums is based on 4 legs, which create a quadripartite approach to sustainability in open-air museums. This approach includes ancient technology, experimental archaeology, interpretation and education, and museum practice. As mentioned, this paper sets out to examine how EXARC and its members have applied the SDGs in their work as a helpful guide for those just beginning in the process. The first leg is ancient technology. So how does understanding ancient technology help us develop sustainability? Caroline Nicolay from Pario Gallico in the UK outlines the connection between ancient housing and today, applying ancient techniques to modern construction practices. She argues the lessons learned from over a millennia's practice can be applied to today's built environment. Answers to similar questions from past and present can be found by experimenting with renewables in ancient and modern architecture. In a different example, this time from Yaroub Al-Obaidi and Sarah Cabbage from Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education in the USA, they discuss the use of ancient technologies to build a southern Iraqi structure, a mudif, or ceremonial house. This is more than reconstruction of a physical structure, though. They also explore how societal reconstruction between US-Iraqi war veterans and Iraqi refugees is re-established by building together. Both these projects show how ancient technology can be used to learn to build and innovate with sustainable materials, broadly meeting SDG Goal 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And specifically to Goal 12.2, achieve the sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources. They also show how this approach can meet Goal 16 by promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Let's take a look at another of EXARC's organizational 4 legs, experimental archaeology. Klaus Kropp from Laurentian Laboratory for Experimental Archaeology in Germany and Deborah Reed of the Henry Ford Museum in the USA outline how agricultural museums and living history farms can connect the public to agricultural food systems and the environment through understanding local economies. They show how applied research at open-air museums can be put into practice, reconnecting people with sustainable agriculture and the sources of their food. Ed Schultz of Colonial Williamsburg, USA has also been working with Klaus Kropp on his Year on the Field project. Ed talks about how modern technology can be applied to intangible skills in experimental farming techniques, such as recording and preserving fragile behavior and outcomes. In a slightly different approach, Anita Radini from the Department of Archaeology in York, UK, explores the debate regarding the public ownership of the seeds of food, fibers, and many other plants, arguing that sustainable revolution needs to start from the very seeds we grow. These EXARC members show how learning and preserving agricultural lessons and techniques is broadly applicable to the SDG Goal 15, to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, reverse land degradation, and to halt biodiversity loss. They can also be directly applied to SDG Goal 2, to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture, and more specifically to targets 2.4 and 2.5, promoting sustainable production, maintaining genetic diversity in ancient foodways. The third leg of EXARC's approach is interpretation and education. This is one that is probably more intuitive for visitors, as open-air museums are clearly perceived as educational establishments. A number of papers for the EXARC Open Access Conference look at community engagement and how the public can be made more aware of their behaviors through partnering with museums, interpretation, and education. Laura Comis of the School of Archaeology in Dublin, Ireland, is looking at how people can be directly involved with museum participation through citizen science, providing what she calls a transcultural platform for knowledge exchange and creation. Frances Houston of the Scottish Cranach Centre, UK, discusses the challenges in developing Scotland's most sustainable museum through self-sufficiency in construction materials and working with the local community via a circular economy. Likewise, Ulla Kortst of Kropdal Museum, Denmark, also looks at the impact of sustainable practices on the museum and with the community when the process of creation and learning are combined. These projects have a common approach, broadly examining the methodologies that can help meet SDG Goal 11, making inclusive, safe, and resilient sustainable cities. They more specifically target 11A to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, as well as 12B, developing sustainable tourism that promotes local culture. They show that when allied to educational experiences that highlight sustainability, heritage experiences can be made directly relevant to guests. They can gain ownership and make more resilient communities. This means Goal 4, and specifically Target 4.6, promoting education in sustainable development, can be met. Case studies on best practice have always been an excellent way of learning about the variety of applied practices. Julia Heeb from the Museum Village Duppel in Germany examines a range of open-air museums and how they are using best practices to develop biodiversity, animal crop diversity, as well as the use of natural materials for buildings, crafts, and resources. Jess Collins looks at how interpretation and education are applied in open-air museums through a number of case studies with school groups. She shows how storytelling and artifacts are used to introduce young audiences to the concept of climate change. Rüdiger Kelm of Archaeological Ecological Center Elbersdorf, Germany, recounts his experiences as an educational partner for sustainable development over the last 15 years. These EXARC members show that archaeology crosses the divide between nature and culture, providing a relevant way for visitors to connect with climate change, past, present, and future. Like the previous papers, these broadly meeting SDG Goal 4 to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, but they also specifically target 4.6, ensuring the knowledge and skills of sustainable behavior. To this, we can also add Goal 13, taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, and specifically Goal 13.3, improving educational awareness. The last of EXARC's 4 legs is museum practice. EXARC works with its partners to develop museum practice in many different areas. Sophia Deenan presents an excellent initiative undertaken by EXARC, NEMO, and Kai Culture, which developed 10 simple actions museums can take to intentionally develop sustainable solutions in their everyday activities. Sarah Manet and Jenny Skillen's paper takes a different approach, looking at museum consumption and offering ways to develop sustainable practices in museum retail, while also remaining relevant and meaningful to the guest. This paper directly relates to many of the targets of SDG Goal 12 to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns, such as targets 2.8, ensuring relevant information and awareness is available, and 12A, developing sustainable patterns of consumption. In a slightly different approach to museum practice, Nafi Bahun Langdo looks at how digital reconstruction supports sustainable outcomes. The paper focuses on how a balance can be maintained between providing access to the legacy of indigenous Indian architecture and society at the same time as sustaining the environment. In a similar bipartite way of approaching sustainability, Kate Shear looks at how environmental degradation and social injustice are both products of the same exploitative human systems. Shear uses case studies from museums that are thinking holistically, combining environmentalism and social justice to combat exploitative human behavior. Both these papers broadly meet SDG Goal 15 to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, as well as specifically meeting targets 15.2 promoting sustainable management and 15.6 promoting equitable use of genetic resources. They also contribute to Goal 16, promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. This has been a wide-ranging overview of the papers presented for EXARC's part of this conference and how EXARC's 4 legs support sustainable outcomes for museums. The variety of approaches and results show how we don't have to approach application of the UN SDGs in a rigid way. They show that, with a little imagination, the actions we take can easily meet SDG goals and targets. Developing sustainable collaborations and getting people involved and contributing has beneficial outcomes to the museum, making them relevant, encouraging wellness, and providing meaning in people's lives. This approach also means sharing your research and study beyond academia to the widest possible audience. To this end, EXARC shares its resources. The talks for this conference are streamed live and made available to all people through the world via the EXARC website and on YouTube. This provides access for people across the world who may never have had an opportunity to attend this conference in person. Virtual meetings and conferences have been one of the positives to take away from the recent reaction to COVID-19 outbreak, meaning people are now far more comfortable with the virtual as a workplace. EXARC means to expand on this by baking it into the process of engaging with people going forward, providing access and preservation of activity in as sustainable way as possible. Thank you.